Welcome aboard. This is a gentleman's fishing trip. I'm going to blame the cold mornings for that. I got away from the ramp just after 10:30 in the morning. That's much later than my usual 4 a.m. to depart the ramp, but it's also much warmer at 10:30 in the morning. But the fact of the matter is that the tide didn't suit where I wanted to fish until the evening, so there was little point in getting out of bed in the cold and going any earlier. However, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Had I known that gathering the live bait was going to be as difficult as it was on this particular day, I probably would have gone out earlier and given myself more time to do it. I looked around several areas where I usually find bait without having much luck at all. I eventually found this school of bait with a little help from a friend. I have seen better schools of bait on the sounder, but as bait schools go, this one didn't look too bad. I spot-locked over it and started jigging. I can tell the difference between a school of bait fish on the sounder and a school of larger fish. I can also have a guess at a couple of fish species just going by the way they school up, but that's about the extent of it. Apart from those couple of exceptions, I have no idea how big a fish is or what sort of species they are just from the sounder screen. The Furuno comes with a feature known as AccuFish, which actually gives you a surprisingly accurate measurement of the fish's length when it sees it on the sounder. But I generally turn that off these days because it clutters up the screen with a lot of numbers. Anyway, all that was just an introduction to saying that in this case, I pulled up a few of the traditional bait species like yakka, slimy, one herring and one pike. But I also pulled up a lot of fish that I had to throw back. Wanting bait, but you're not it. Among those was baby squire, there was a few baby brim, and there was some baby dart there as well. And of course all of them have a size limit, so they had to go back. Cut a long story short, I found that getting bait to actually jump on my Sabiki rig that day was extremely difficult. I was mostly pulling up one at a time, no matter what species it was, and I think there was only one occasion where I actually got two on the Sabiki rig at once. In the finish, all I had was 7 good live baits. Now that's nowhere near enough for a night's fishing, but I did have a variety of excellent backup bait from Mr. Bait, so it wasn't a total disaster. Always go prepared with some backup bait. I checked out a few spots at Harries and ended up picking this one to fish on. There were a few fish showing on the sounder. It wasn't a remarkable show, but it was something. You can see them most clearly in the 3D view. I was driving directly into the current at the time, and you can see there's some fish scattered at the rear of the structure and some others at the front of the structure. Judging by the colours on the 3D view, it appears that the ones at the front of the structure are likely to be bigger fish, because the 3D view is set up so that the stronger or deeper the colour, the stronger the return from the fish, and stronger returns usually mean a larger fish. So I positioned my boat up current from the structure so that my baits would drift down to the structure. That's the float lines. The paternoster rigs were going to drop down straight below the boat, so hopefully the fish would smell the bait and come forward to find it. I got settled into the spot that I was going to fish for the night just before sunset. This is only the second time that I've used this vibe that I got from Mr. Bait. Again, first drop down, jig it up and down, and I got a fish on. I am really impressed. When it comes to lures, the trolled spoons are the only thing that I really do much good on. I have a little bit of success with trolling hard bodies, but I've had very limited success with any sort of soft plastic lure. But this vibe's a different story. First trip that I tried it out on, got a fish on straight away, first drop. Lost the fish at the boat before I even got a really good look at it, but still got it hooked. Tried it again this time and got a fish. Admittedly, only a grinner. But still, first drop down, something wanted to bite it. So pretty impressed with that, and certainly will be using it a bit more. But I need to find a decent show of fish, I think, before I drop it. And that's why I haven't used it much. I've been looking for a good show of fish in some reasonable depth. Maybe that's the wrong way to go about it, but that's the way I'm looking at it at the moment. Well, got a grinner on it again. I guess that's what I was seeing on my sounder. People have different opinions about burley. Some wouldn't fish without it, and some say it just attracts the vermin. I'm sort of halfway between those camps. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. It definitely does attract some vermin, but on the other hand, it also attracts the fish. And sometimes it can get the fish to biting when they're not really into biting. So I do use it, but not always. And chunks of leftover bait are some of the best burley around. The sunset from Harries was a beautiful backdrop to be fishing against. It was a really nice sunset. Unfortunately, the fish didn't appreciate it as much as I did, because they just weren't interested. It was like the bait fishing earlier. The fish were there, but they just weren't all that interested in eating, at least not for me. George was out at pretty much the same time, and he bagged out in no time, but for me, just not so much. I don't know if the camera's got enough light to pick this up, but I'm on at last. It's been a slow day. Oh shit, I didn't get the net ready again. He's a big one, I'll have to, I don't think he's that big. He should be liftable, this one. What was that? Didn't feel too good. Got some colour. What is he? Oh shit! Huh. Oh, God. I'm not having a good day. Okay, net comes out. Oh, wasn't you? First snapper landed on the boat. I lost one beside the boat. This is the first one for the trip landed on the boat, 46 centimetres, so not huge, but decent feed. This is my first fish, as I said, 46 and a bit centimetres. Well worth taking home, although not the big one I was hoping to get. I got a fish on. Well, it's not a bad fish, this one. Same size as the last one, I think. Yeah, pretty much. He's only 43, a little bit smaller than the last one. He just fought a bit harder. But second fish on board, 43 centimetres. He fought a bit harder than the first one, but the first one was bigger. And this is the second fish I landed, 43 centimetres, and he fought harder than the other one at 46 and a bit centimetres. I guess he was just more determined to live, but he ended up coming home for dinner anyway. These two snapshots are looking towards the port of Brisbane and towards Cleveland Point from Harries. Notice how calm the water is early in the night. Unfortunately, that condition didn't last all night. I stayed at it until 9:30, but then I turned in because I was getting quite tired by that point. Had the fish been biting, that would have kept me awake for a lot longer. I hadn't caught a fish for over an hour, and it's quite boring sitting there at night by myself waiting for a bite that doesn't seem to come. As it turned out, the idea of going to bed at 9:30 wasn't such a bad thing after all. The sea was calm as glass early in the evening, and it remained that way till about midnight, when the tide turned and the wind started to come up. I don't know why they should be linked, but I often see a change of wind happen about the same time as a change of tide. It could be just that because I notice one, I notice the other, and it just happens randomly other than that, but I have noticed a lot that the wind and tide can change together. And anyway, the increased movement of the boat woke me up about 12 o'clock. While I generally sleep like a baby on the boat, any change in the conditions usually wakes me up. And that's a good thing because then I can check and see what's happening. In this case, everything was fine, the anchor was secure, but as the morning wore on from midnight onwards, it just got worse. From midnight until about 3:30, I just dozed on and off, about 10-15 minutes at a time. At 3:30, I'd had enough and I decided that I'd go and check the 2 pots that I'd put out in an area that I've never crabbed before to see if they had anything. Disappointingly, they did not. However, on the plus side, by the time I got back to my fishing spot, things were starting to calm down. I managed to jig up 2 more fresh live baits while I was looking for a spot to fish in the morning. The first live bait was bitten off, hooks and all, probably a shark. This is the second live bait of the morning. I had it on a snell rig and the bottom hook was floating loose when I pulled it in. From the size and shape of the bite, I think it's quite likely that a decent sized snapper had a go at it. The bottom snell hook was an octopus hook, so the only thing I can think of really is that the fish actually got the hook, because taking a bite like that I can't see how it missed the hook. I think it got the hook, but the hook just slid out of its mouth. Now maybe a circle hook on the bottom would have done better, but circle hooks on the bottom of a snell rig I find a bit hard to get into the bait sometimes. The 8Os and 7Os are okay, but anything smaller than that's a bit awkward. So it is what it is. I guess some fish are just lucky. The interesting thing about that bite and the previous one was that it was on a bait runner reel, and I had the reel switched into bait runner mode, so there's practically no drag on the reel. And in both cases, the reel didn't move. No line was pulled by either bite. It just chomped through that bait without pulling any line at all. What was likely to be the best fish of the trip took half the bait and didn't even get the hook. So not only was the live bait fishing difficult, the fishing in general was difficult, for me at least, on that day. I hadn't had a very restful night, and I had a couple of snapper on ice from the previous day, even if they weren't huge. So I decided to try out the underwater camera I'd recently been given, and then call it a day. The camera itself is older technology, and it is designed to be towed behind the boat to capture fish as they attack trolled lures. My idea on this trip was to lower it down on the downrigger and capture images of the bottom. As a first test, I decided to try the so-called houseboat wreck at Peel. I set up my drifts to take me directly over the wreck so that I could lower the camera down to different depths to find out what worked best. Unfortunately, on that day the water wasn't very clear, and that, combined with the older camera technology, meant that the video wasn't as good as I had hoped. You can see bits of the wreck heavily encrusted in marine growth, but the image quality falls far short of what I'd hoped to achieve. If you look closely, you can see some movement close to the sandy bottom. They're fish, but it's very hard to pick them out, again, due to the water quality. I do plan to persevere with this for a while and see if I can get some better images around the bay when the water quality is a lot clearer. Unfortunately, I found out that fishing at night doesn't allow for much in the way of video. I've owned DSLR cameras which do a pretty good job of low light photography, but not being a photographer myself and just using cameras, I didn't really appreciate just how poor the video from an action camera at night would be. All of the footage from the action cams that I was wearing was totally useless because there just wasn't enough light. It was just pretty much pitch black. The little bit of footage that I included from the dash-mounted action cam is only marginally better. In future, I'm going to limit my video endeavours to daylight hours only. Well, what's to take home from the trip? I dropped another one, probably about the size of the smaller one there, right at the boat. I didn't have the net ready, I went to lift it. So, disappointing, but that's the way it is. A bit disappointing I didn't do better with bigger, but never mind. I get a nice feed out of these anyway. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, good fishing.